Good afternoon and welcome, War Report family. We got a special treat for you guys today. Joining us is SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey, here to talk a little bit about SEC Media Days. Greg, Hugh Freeze went up today. He referenced you. He said that you have, in some ways, mentored him a lot and given him guidance. Can you talk a little bit about the guidance that you've given Hugh Freeze in his journey back to the SEC?
Sure. I don't want to, cross boundaries, but generally, when you go back to 2017 and his departure from Ole Miss, Hugh reached out to me. It was actually one of our phone calls traveling down to enroll one of his daughters at Auburn, and we spent some time in the fall. I just said, you did really good work. They obviously had an infractions case. And then the other more personal issues. And I said, I think you really do yourself well to just focus on you and your family. Take some time. Talked about, the thought that if you want to be back, I think you'll be back. But there's a time to kind of let healing take place, allow him to recover. Fast forward. In 2018, I actually thought he might be back as offensive coordinator. There's a lot of notion of me just preventing people. We set some parameters that applied to everyone because we wanted to treat all 14 equally. And I can tell you exactly where I was when the phone rang. I was in a Wegmans grocery store in Camillus, New York. I grew up there. I'd been at the National Football Foundation, and he had the Liberty opportunity. And I just said, Hugh, if you're asking me for my opinion, I think that'd be a really healthy opportunity for you. Get back in, re-energize yourself in a different venue. Let just a little bit of time pass. And we had talked through some opportunities, and we talked in, I don't know if it was the fall, early spring at some point, a year and a half or so ago, just about direction. And appreciated his willingness to listen. And we really haven't been disagreeable. He's going to listen to some things. He has to make his own decisions, and I certainly respect that. But it ended with a lot of questions of me about welcoming him back, and happy to have Hugh back. I think we all learn in different ways and from different things, and he's got an exciting opportunity. I know he is passionate about being a part of the Southeastern Conference. I look forward to seeing his work this fall and in the years ahead.
Auburn certainly feels confident in Hugh Freeze's ability to be able to, for lack of a better term, stay on the straight and narrow and do what needs to be done. But I want to change gears and talk a little bit about your opening address yesterday. You talked about NIL, and you talked about the rules around it maybe not being what was intended, and bad actors and, a lot of missing clarity not serving the student athletes best. What is the conference's plan to help get NIL under control and, back on the right path?
We're in this circumstance not solely because of state laws, but state laws jumped ahead of creating the space for name, image, and likeness opportunity for college athletes. Whether that's right or wrong, that's what happened. We had observed, and we being the Southeastern Conference and a lot of our colleague conferences, that the wrong way to implement name, image, and likeness is on a state-by-state basis. And so yesterday, what I shared was the only place to remedy the full set of circumstances we have is through congressional action to have a national standard. And the consistency we're constantly asked about by our student athletes. That's not the only venue in which we're focused. We have to deal with litigation. So We're in Congress, we're in the courts, we're going to deal with state legislation. What do we do as a conference, and what can the NCAA do? And I think some of it goes back to basic issues, and so you referenced my comments and the blurring of lines, the involvement of boosters directly in recruiting prospective student athletes, transfers or high school student athletes. We worked really hard for decades to clarify that boosters are not recruiters, yet we're back into that confusion. We have states now that have not enforced their own state laws, now saying not only are we not going to enforce our state laws, but nobody else can come in and oversee their reasonable name, image, and likeness policies. It brings you back to say, well, Congress is a place to solve these issues. And the motivation here is not to take away opportunity. It's to provide actual name, image, and likeness opportunities that young people can access, but also to provide them with protections from bad actors, provide accountability if somebody makes a commitment that they don't fulfill.
Right.
Offers a contract that's not properly backed by the substance of the contract.
Right.
And even the expectation that a young person is doing what's consistent with those name, image, and likeness standards in the agreement to receive the the compensation they want. Remuneration, there you go. Don't use tongue twisters on the radio. That's the editing process.
Well, we certainly hope NIL continues to serve student athletes. Certainly in the Olympic sports, it's opened up some opportunities for athletes who would have otherwise gone directly pro in their sport.
Yes.
To come to college like Suni Lee and athletes.
Great example. You don't have a great track record of Olympians in gymnastics coming to college after, but Suni had 2 wonderful years and was able to prepare for another Olympic opportunity. I saw Auburn a season ago, not this past year, in Athens, Georgia. You know, that's a pretty intense rivalry, Auburn and Georgia, yet everyone in Stegman Coliseum was applauding when she was introduced.
Right.
And I think that's a unique opportunity. I think you've seen young people in men's basketball decide, you know what, I'm not going to go for a G League experience. This is a much better life to be in college, to have some economic opportunity. And that's happened in football. It's happened in baseball. It can happen in other sports as well. So I think that's the healthy type of activity that we want.
Right, absolutely. I want to end talking about conference expansion. Last year of the SEC as we know it with divisions.
Yeah.
I got to ask you a question in the main session about how the elimination of divisions best serves the SEC's run of titles, the College Football National Playoff. You kind of mentioned that fair and balanced was the discussion behind the scenes about it. Yet Florida ended up with one of the hardest schedules I think I've ever seen. They play 11 Power 5 conferences. Some of that is because of their non-conference.
Right.
But it also eliminates some traditional rivalries like LSU Auburn. How does the conference plan to balance making sure that you have those rivalries that are so important to, you know, those teams and those fan bases?
That's the challenge of any expansion, and we had that challenge when we got to 14 teams. And it was a relevant question. So I want to go back to first the observation about accessing the national championship. And that's a bit of a wild card. That's a competitive endeavor, and from year to year, one never knows. And I think you have to be careful. We have to be careful, and our university has to be careful about the schedule as the vehicle to access the national championship.
Right.
It's a part, but leadership, support, talent on the field, all of those combine to form the foundation for accessing a national championship. But the schedule itself, we can't protect every game that's been played. The question is, how many games should be protected on an annual basis? I mean, that's the fundamental question. And if it's 9 games, we know we can do 3 and achieve some of that equity and balance that we talked about. If it's 8 games, we can do that with 1. And every other game is an every other year circumstance. I mean, that's really the essence of the decision as it relates to the rotation of games. Now, when you look, so Florida has 3 non-conference games scheduled in 24 to build up to that 11. But if you look individually at every one of our schedules, we've run a strength of schedule looking back historically on winning percentage. And what we've done is narrow the width of disparity between strength of schedule and divisions, which was pretty broad, about a 15 percentage point difference between the most difficult schedule to the least difficult schedule. I think there's about a 6% variance, and
okay.
that's pretty incremental. So one of the advantages that we did achieve is a much more narrow historical look about the strength of schedule, which creates that fairness, if you will, within the balance of things. And really, when we were going through the 16 schedules for 24 before they were announced, you'd have a game or two, you're like, wow, that's a tough game to have in there, and that's a tough schedule. And then you put schedule like A aside, and you go to schedule G, just mixing up the schools. And you'd look and say, wow, that's a tough game. And then you say, that's a really tough schedule. And what we have is an 8-game conference schedule model, 16 really challenging and exciting schedules, I would argue. That's what we want. We want to challenge ourselves at the highest level, and we're going to have to come to conclusion on how frequently do we want to play key games. And if you look back, Auburn and Florida was one of those key games lost in one of our past expansions on an annual basis. And that's one where you see at 14 teams with divisions, you're only seeing Florida and Auburn once every 12 years. And in the future, either 8 or 7 without divisions, you'll see Florida at least once every 4 years.
Okay, wow.
And you'll be in Gainesville once every 4 years. So we've narrowed not only that competitive equity piece, but the ability to rotate teams through more frequently.
Well, with Texas and Oklahoma joining the conference, I know a lot of fans are looking forward to creating some new rivalries. I want to thank Commissioner Greg Sankey for joining me to talk a little bit about SEC Media Days. We'll be back at you guys with more content this week. Stay tuned to the War Report. War Eagle.